David froze in the doorway. The cabin was drowned in half-darkness, moonlight cutting thin silver lines through broken shutters. Wind howled through the cracks, carrying the scent of damp wood and decay. But inside, where they stood, there was warmth, heat even, a fire born of betrayal. Claire's fingers threaded through Ethan's hair, slow, deliberate, as if every second was forbidden but irresistible. His brother, his own flesh and blood. Her laughter, breathless and trembling, echoed against the hollow walls. It wasn't carefree. It carried both guilt and hunger. A laugh David hadn't heard from her in years. Ethan pulled her closer, his hands sliding down her back with the certainty of someone who no longer feared the line he had crossed. "He doesn't see you," Ethan whispered, his voice low, confident. "But I do." "I always have," Claire shivered. Her eyes fluttered shut, then snapped open as if she remembered something. "This is wrong, Ethan. It's so wrong," she whispered, her voice cracking with conflict. But even as she spoke, she leaned into him, surrendering. "And yet, I can't stop." Ethan smirked, reckless, almost triumphant. "Neither can I. He'll never know." To David, I'll always be the little brother who'd never betray him. David's stomach twisted so violently he thought he might be sick. Every fragment of memory rushed back. Claire's sudden family visits, Ethan showing up late at night, the phone calls that always died the second David walked into the room. He had dismissed them as harmless, but here now, in this rotten cabin, the coincidences burned away. This was truth. Ugly. Inescapable. It wasn't only the betrayal of a wife. It was blood turned venom. A knife driven straight into the heart of brotherhood. His breath trembled, loud enough that for a moment he thought they would hear him. But they were too lost, too consumed by what should have been unthinkable. Claire pressed her forehead to Ethan's chest, whispering like a prayer. "If David ever finds out, it will destroy him." David's vision blurred, rage colliding with heartbreak. Every instinct screamed to rip Ethan away, to force Claire to meet his eyes, to demand an answer. But rage was swallowed by something colder, a silence that promised patience. He stepped back, then another, retreating into the shadows, swallowed whole by the night. And in the hollow ache of his chest, a single thought branded itself into his soul. Some betrayals don't just kill love. They poison blood itself. If you were in David's place, watching your wife with your own brother, would you confront them now, or let the secret rot in silence? Tell me what you would do, and stay with me, because patience can be deadlier than rage. The next morning, the town looked unchanged. The cobblestone streets gleamed after a night of rain. The old cafe buzzed with chatter, and David's woodworking shop opened as it always did, the scent of pine and sawdust spilling into the air. To the townspeople, David and Claire were perfect. He, the steady husband, strong, patient, the proud owner of a family shop that had lasted for 3 generations. She, the gentle wife, graceful and kind, always smiling at neighbors, always at her husband's side during festivals and town gatherings. Together, they were the image of small-town happiness, a neat home at the edge of town, warm dinners by candlelight, a couple admired, even envied. But every perfect picture hides a crack, and this crack had a name: Ethan. Ethan was David's younger brother, the one who had vanished years ago. When he returned, it was as if the town itself welcomed him like a hero. He arrived with stories of the outside world, tales of places most people had only read about. He carried himself with confidence, wore a rugged charm, and spoke with the ease of a man who had seen and survived. At the local bar, men leaned in to hear his stories. At the market, women's eyes followed him. At gatherings, Ethan was magnetic, able to turn silence into laughter with just a few words. To David, his brother's return was a blessing, a chance to mend what time had broken, a chance to finally have family close again. He had no idea it was the beginning of his undoing. Claire welcomed Ethan politely at first. A soft smile, a careful embrace at the welcome party. Nothing more. But something shifted. The glances grew longer, carrying sparks no one else seemed to notice. The jokes became private, whispered between them in corners of crowded rooms. And sometimes, just sometimes, their hands touched in ways that looked accidental, but lingered too long to be innocent. David never questioned it. When he saw Claire laughing with Ethan, he felt grateful she treated his brother as family. When Ethan stayed late at the house, David thought nothing of it. After all, wasn't this what he had always wanted? His wife and brother, under one roof, happy together. The town noticed nothing either. People only gossiped about how lucky David was, how charming Ethan seemed, how Claire must have felt relieved to finally have family close by again. No one suspected what lay beneath. No one imagined that behind the polite greetings, behind the dinners that looked warm and whole, there was something rotten, something dangerous, something that, if exposed, would not just shatter a marriage, but tear through blood itself. And so, David continued his days in peace, at least on the surface. Each morning, he worked at the shop, sawdust clinging to his skin, shaping wood with steady hands. Each evening, he returned home, where Claire's smile waited, where dinner was set, and where Ethan sometimes joined them at the table. To the outside world, they were whole. To the outside world, they were enviable. But the truth was already spreading, like a crack in glass, invisible at first, but deepening with every breath, every laugh, every touch. In a town where no secret stays hidden for long, they managed to hide the one secret that could never be forgiven. And David had yet to realize that the betrayal waiting for him would come not only from his wife, but from his own blood. David began to notice the cracks. At first they were small, barely noticeable. Claire came home later than usual, her explanations vague. She claimed she had errands, visits, headaches that needed fresh air. But her tone had changed. Hurried, rehearsed. Her phone, once left carelessly on the table, was now locked with a code he didn't know. When it buzzed, she reached for it too quickly. And sometimes, when David caught her gaze, she looked away as if her eyes carried a secret too heavy to hold. David told himself it was nothing, that he was paranoid. Claire was his wife, his loyal, gentle wife. And Ethan was his brother. But paranoia has a way of growing louder in silence. One evening, while David closed his shop, a neighbor passed by. A kind old woman, one who had lived in the town longer than anyone. She smiled, hesitant, before speaking. "I saw Claire the other day," she said softly, "with Ethan. They seemed close. But I suppose it's family, isn't it?" Her words were casual, even kind, but they dug into David's mind like thorns. Close. Family. The two words tangled, suffocating him. That night, David lay awake beside Claire, staring at the ceiling while her breaths fell steady in sleep. He told himself again and again, "It's nothing. They're family. She loves me." But doubt had already taken root. The following days, he watched more carefully. He noticed how Claire's laughter rang brighter when Ethan was near, how she touched her hair, her neck, small nervous gestures she didn't show with anyone else. How Ethan's eyes lingered too long, his smile carrying something unsaid. And then there were the touches. A hand brushing against another, a shoulder leaning too close. Moments small enough to be excused, yet heavy enough to choke David's faith. Every time he tried to dismiss it, the image returned. His wife's hand on his brother's arm, lingering, familiar. One night, David followed. Claire had said she was going to visit a friend. But instead of turning toward town, she drove down a narrow road that led into the woods. David's hands clenched the wheel as he kept his distance. The headlights cut through the trees until they reached it. A small, abandoned cabin, half forgotten by time. His heart pounded as he killed the engine. Through the cracks in the wooden walls, light spilled out, dim, flickering. He stepped closer, careful, each footfall heavy with dread. And then he heard it. Laughter. Her laughter. Soft, breathless, achingly familiar. Followed by Ethan's voice, low and intimate. "No one will find us here." David froze outside, his body rigid, his soul unraveling. He wanted to burst in, to tear the door from its hinges, but his feet would not move. Instead, he pressed his back against the rough wall, listening. The sounds cut through him like glass. Whispers, a muffled gasp, the rustle of movement. Every piece of doubt he had tried to bury ignited into certainty. Inside that cabin was not family. Inside that cabin was betrayal made flesh. David's mind splintered, a storm of rage and heartbreak crashing inside him. He covered his mouth, forcing back the sound of his own breath. His vision blurred with tears, but he did not let them fall. Because something colder had already taken root, patience. The kind that waits, the kind that watches, the kind that plans. That night, outside the cabin, David's world shattered. But he did not confront them, not yet. Because sometimes silence is not weakness, it is the beginning of something far more dangerous. David had already chosen his path. Not fury, not confrontation, but silence, patience, the patience of a hunter. The next morning, he played his role to perfection. He kissed Claire's cheek, poured her coffee, asked about her plans as if the night before had never existed. When her eyes flickered with unease, he held her gaze just long enough to calm her. She let out a breath of relief. With Ethan, David was even warmer. "Come by tonight," he said casually. "Claire's making your favorite stew." At dinner, he poured wine, clinked glasses, laughed at his brother's jokes. To the world, they looked like brothers reunited. But beneath the surface, the trap was already tightening. Late at night, David pretended to sleep. Beside him, Claire shifted restlessly, her breathing uneven. In the dark, she whispered to herself, "He's been so kind lately. It makes me feel guilty." But guilt didn't stop her. The next evening, when Ethan brushed her hand in the kitchen, she didn't pull away. She smiled, though her eyes darted nervously toward the hallway. One afternoon in the shop, Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You sure you're okay with me being around this much?" David looked up from the wood he was sanding, calm and steady. "Of course. You're my brother. Where else would you be?" Ethan studied him for a long second, suspicion flickering, but David's face betrayed nothing. Ethan forced a grin and let it go. One evening, David returned home earlier than expected, footsteps heavy in the hall. Claire and Ethan sat too close on the couch. They stiffened when the door opened. David held up a bag of groceries and chuckled. "Thought I'd surprise you." "Hope I didn't interrupt anything." Claire's smile was too quick. Ethan's laugh rang hollow. David said nothing more, but he noticed everything. He installed cameras in the lamp and the kitchen clock. At night, he scrolled through hours of footage, He saw Ethan linger too long in the doorway. Claire touched her necklace when she lied. Their stolen glances, their silent language. The illusion of safety only made them careless. One evening, Claire stood at the window, watching David chop wood outside. Ethan whispered behind her, "He doesn't suspect a thing." Claire's voice trembled. "I don't know. He feels different. Kinder. Like he's watching me without looking." Ethan wrapped his arms around her. "Trust me. His trust is his weakness." Claire closed her eyes, torn between guilt and desire. David looked on from the yard, his hands tight around the axe handle. Another night, David left his phone unlocked on the counter with a text visible. Working late. Home after midnight. Then he slipped outside, silent in the shadows. Through the window, he saw Claire glance at the phone, then at Ethan. Her lips parted, hesitant. Minutes later, they disappeared into the living room. The hidden camera caught everything. David stood outside, the faintest smile on his lips. With each passing week, Ethan grew bolder. At the dinner table, his hand brushed Claire's under the napkin. In the shop, he leaned too close, his words sharp. One afternoon, he murmured, "You've always been the responsible one, David." Maybe that's why Claire needs me to make her feel alive. David met his eyes, calm and unreadable. Then I'm glad she has family she can rely on. Ethan froze, then forced a laugh, telling himself David meant nothing by it. But David already had enough. At night, in the silence of his workshop, he replayed the recordings. Claire's laughter, Ethan's whispers, the sound of betrayal over and over. Each clip was a blade. But David endured them all, because he was no longer simply a betrayed husband. He was a man sharpening the truth into a weapon. The night of the town gathering arrived. It was a modest affair. String lights draped across the square, tables lined with food and wine, neighbors greeting one another with laughter and warmth. To everyone, it was just another evening of community, another reminder of how small towns hold together. David stood among them, smiling, shaking hands, nodding politely. Claire was at his side, radiant as always, her dress flowing under the lights. Ethan lingered nearby, charismatic as ever, drawing people in with stories of his travels. No one could have guessed what was about to unfold. As the evening wore on, David tapped his glass gently. "Before we eat," he said warmly, "I'd like to share something with you all. A small family memory." The crowd hushed, expectant. A screen lit up at the front of the hall. At first it showed innocent images, David's workshop, the town's old streets, a photograph of his father. Then the tone shifted. The screen flickered, and suddenly there was Claire. Her face illuminated by headlights, Ethan's hand sliding onto her knee. Gasps erupted. Another cut. The living room, dimly lit. Ethan brushing against her hand, their eyes locking. And then, the cabin. Laughter, breathless whispers. The sound played through the speakers, echoing across the hall, so loud and raw it seemed to scrape against the walls. If David ever finds out, it will destroy him. Claire's voice, trembling, undeniable. The room froze. Every head turned. Every breath caught. Claire's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor. Her knees buckled, and she clutched the edge of the table, her face drained of color. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No, David. Please." But the screen betrayed her again. Another clip, another touch, another laugh that was no longer hers alone. Ethan's mask cracked. He surged to his feet, fury in his eyes. "You planned this," he hissed at David. "You set us up." David's gaze was calm, his voice steady. "No, you set yourselves up. I only showed the truth." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Neighbors stared, stunned. Some covered their mouths in horror. Others shook their heads, unable to reconcile what they had seen with the images of the perfect family they had once admired. This wasn't just infidelity. It was blood betraying blood. A wound that stained not only a marriage, but the very idea of kinship. Claire collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling, tears streaking down her face. I didn't mean for it to... But her voice was drowned in the weight of the room. Ethan's fists clenched, his chest heaving, but no words came. He had been stripped bare, his arrogance gutted by the eyes of the town. And David simply stood there, not triumphant, not smiling, just silent. His eyes scanned the room, letting every soul bear witness. The betrayal no longer lived in shadows. It lived here, exposed, undeniable, consuming. They thought their secret belonged to them. But secrets are like fire. Once unleashed, they burn everything in their path. And in that hall, under the eyes of the town, David's silence became his sharpest weapon. For some betrayals do not end in anger, but in exposure. And exposure is the cruelest revenge. The hall was suffocating with silence. Claire's sobs shook her shoulders, her mascara streaking down her pale face. Ethan stood tense, his jaw locked, but his bravado was gone, stripped bare under the weight of dozens of eyes. David rose slowly. The scrape of his chair against the floor sliced through the silence like a blade. He looked at Claire first. Her eyes begged, pleaded, drowned in tears. His voice was calm, but cold as stone. I didn't lose a wife tonight. I lost the illusion of one. You never loved me, Claire. You only loved the thrill of betraying me. Her face crumbled, the words cutting deeper than any scream could. Then David turned to Ethan, his brother, his blood. You. David's gaze hardened. You haven't just betrayed me. You've disgraced the very name you carry. From this night forward, you are no brother of mine. You are nothing, Ethan flinched, as though the words themselves had struck him. But David wasn't finished. He turned back to the crowd, his voice steady, deliberate. In this town, trust is everything. I showed you the truth tonight. Not to seek pity, but so you would know exactly who they are. From this day, I sever all ties. I will divorce her. And he... David pointed at Ethan, his hand trembling with restrained fury. He no longer exists to me. Gasps rippled through the hall. Neighbors exchanged horrified glances. Whispers erupted, low, venomous, impossible to ignore. Claire's hands shook violently as she reached out. David, please, don't do this, don't leave me like this. But no one came to her aid. Ethan tried to meet David's eyes, tried to speak but found no words. His arrogance had dissolved into shame. Around him, people pulled back, avoiding his gaze as though his very presence was poison. And David simply turned and walked toward the door. No rage, no violence, only the quiet finality of a man who had already won. As the door closed behind him, silence consumed the hall once more. Only Claire's broken sobs remained. Only Ethan's hollow stare, and the weight of a town's disgust pressing down on them both. The hall faded behind David. The night swallowed his footsteps, but the silence he left behind clung like smoke. Claire and Ethan remained, stripped of everything but shame. Their betrayal was no longer hidden. It was etched into memory, not just David's, but the town's. And there is no place darker than the prison of one's own disgrace. David's revenge had not been rage. It had not been blood. It was truth unmasked before the world. Because some wounds heal. But betrayal? Betrayal lingers. It poisons love. And when it comes from family, it poisons blood itself. And sometimes, the cruelest punishment is not what you do to your enemies, but what they must live with once the mask is gone. So ask yourself, if you were David, would you have done the same? Would you have chosen patience over anger, exposure over violence? Or would you have confronted them sooner, demanded answers face to face? Tell me what you would have done. And if you want more stories where betrayal meets its reckoning, make sure to follow, because there are secrets still waiting to be revealed.